Across the globe, cultures have passed down stories of mysterious human-like beings that live just beyond the reach of civilization. The Yeti in the Himalayas, the Yowie in Australia, and countless others, each legend shaped by its landscape, its people, and its fears. What makes these creatures so compelling isn't just their elusiveness, it's the way they reflect something primal. The idea that the world still holds secrets, that not everything has been mapped, explained, or understood. Whether feared, revered, or simply wondered about, these beings continue to stir imaginations and spark debate. In 1884, a strange report surfaced from a quiet town in British Columbia, one that blurred the lines between folklore, curiosity, and something far more unsettling. Long before Bigfoot became a household name, Canada had its own mystery tucked into the railways and ridgelines. A creature that was allegedly captured near the town of Yale, described as ape-like, covered in hair, and oddly human in stature, and the newspapers called him Jacko. On July 4, 1884, the Daily British Colonist out of Victoria, British Columbia, printed a headline that stopped readers cold. It was titled, "What is it? A strange creature captured above Yale, a British Columbia gorilla." The article described a bizarre event that allegedly took place near Number 4 Tunnel, about 20 miles above the town of Yale, along the Canadian Pacific Railway line. It claimed that the railway workers, assisted by messengers from British Columbia Express Company and several men from Lytton, had captured a creature that defied explanation. The being was said to resemble a gorilla, though not entirely. It stood 4 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 127 pounds. Its body was covered in glossy black hair about an inch long, except for its hands and its feet, which were described as more human-like. The forearms were unusually long, and the creature reportedly possessed immense strength, able to twist and break thick sticks that no man could snap in the same way. It made noises that were described as part bark, part growl, and was said to be very cagey, though slowly warming up to its keeper, a man named George Tilbury. The article claimed that the creature's favorite food was berries and fresh milk, and that raw meat was being withheld on the advice of a doctor who feared it might provoke aggression. The mode of captive was described in an unsettling clarity. The railway engineer had spotted what he thought was a man lying near the tracks. When the train approached, the figure sprang up and climbed onto the bluff. Several railway staff gave chase and cornered it on a ledge where it could neither ascend or descend. One man crawled above the creature and dropped a rope which was used to secure it and bring it back down. The whole tone of the article was very matter-of-fact, almost clinical, but the implications were anything but. It described a creature that seemed caught between species, between worlds. There were no photographs included, no follow-up was printed. Just a single chilling account of something that should not have been there. In Victorian slang, Jacko was often used as a nickname for monkeys, especially those that were kept as pets or used in street performances. The name had a mischievous edge, commonly applied to characters that were playful, unpredictable, and a little unruly. It was also a reflection of Jack, a name already tied to countless archetypes in folklore and popular culture. Jack the Lad, Jack in the Box, Jack Sprat. And the suffix "o" was added as a layer of informality, kind of a cheeky familiarity. So when the Daily British Colonist described a creature captured near Yale with the name Jacko being circulated, it wasn't random. It fit the tone of the time, a label that suggested something wild, strange, and not entirely serious. Whether the creature existed or not, the name itself framed it as something to be gawked at, something to laugh about, and something not entirely human. In the days following the article's publication, whispers spread quickly through the town of Yale. People wanted to see this mysterious Jacko creature for themselves. The paper claimed that it was being held at a local jail watched over by George Tilbury, and this was enough to draw a crowd. On July 11th of 1884, the British Columbian reported that nearly 200 people had gathered outside the jail, hoping for a glimpse of the so-called British Columbia gorilla. But what they found was far different than their expectations. There were no rattling bars, no strange sounds coming from behind the walls, just a man, irritated and exhausted, fielding questions he had no answers for. The paper described him as the governor of the goal and noted that he had been completely exhausted with his patience when it came to the crowd. No one was allowed inside, no photographs were taken, and no verified proof was offered. The refusal to let the public see Jacko, the locked doors, the absence of overall proof, it all echoed a very familiar strategy. In the world of sideshows, mystery isn't a flaw. That's the hook. The less people saw, the more they speculated. A creature glimpsed through a rumor became more valuable than one fully revealed. So the jail's secrecy didn't just protect the story, but it amplified it. By withholding access, the speculation grew in the minds of the crowd, turning absence into a lure and doubt into demand. But if Jacko wasn't there, maybe he was somewhere else. And where was that? And with an unrevealed ape creature, a new theory began to circulate, one that tried to stitch the creature's disappearance into the fabric of the spectacle. Some believed that Jacko was sold to P.T. Barnum and reappeared under a new name, Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy. Jojo was a Russian teenager with hypertrichosis, a rare condition that causes thick hair to grow across his face and body. Barnum presented him as a wild child raised by wolves. Though Jojo could speak fluently in Russian, German, and English, he wrote letters. He answered questions. He was not the silent, animal-like figure described in the Daily British Colonist. But of course, this theory doesn't hold. The timeline is blurred, the physical description diverges, and Jojo's documented life doesn't align with the creature's alleged capture near Yale. But the fact that the idea took root at all says something deeper about the era. It wasn't just about solving a mystery, it was about ownership, about turning the unknown into a commodity. Barnum's world thrived on that tension. The line between curiosity and exploitation was thin and often deliberately crossed. Creatures, conditions, and cultures were packaged for public consumption, their stories rewritten to fit the stage. Whether Jacko was real or imagined, the suggestion that he might have ended up behind glass, barking on cue, reveals more about the audience than the act. It's a reminder that wonder, the unchecked, can become something darker, something that doesn't ask what the creature is, but more how can it be used. Now, P.T. Barnum did not invent deception, but he perfected its presentation. Long before Jacko's article appeared, Barnum had already built an empire on the allure of the almost believable. In 1842, he introduced the world to the Fiji mermaid, a grotesque taxidermy creation made by stitching the torso of a monkey to the tail of a fish. It was small, shriveled, and disturbing, nothing like the graceful sea creatures of myth. But that didn't matter. Barnum didn't need it to be real, he just needed it to be talked about. He leased the mermaid to Moses Kimball of the Boston Museum and launched a campaign that manipulated newspapers into printing exclusive stories about the creature. Naturalists refused to authenticate it, but Barnum leaned into that doubt. He understood that mystery was more profitable than certainty. The Fiji mermaid wasn't just an exhibit, it was a masterclass in suggestion. People came not because they believed, but because they wanted to. And that desire, that flicker of possibility, was the product Barnum sold best. His museum became a sanctuary for the strange and the irregular. He claimed an elderly enslaved woman had been George Washington's nursemaid. He displayed a fake giant. He blurred the lines between curiosity and exploitation, turning human difference into spectacle and myth into merchandise. Barnum's genius wasn't in what he showed, it was how he framed it. He created a space where disbelief was suspended, not because the evidence was convincing, but because the experience itself was irresistible. With a quiet jail cell, no photographs, and no proof of said Jacko, it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Just 5 days after the original article, the Mainland Guardian responded with a tone that was anything but neutral. They published an article that completely dismissed the story, stating plainly that no such animal was caught, and questioned how the colonist could have been duped in such a manner. The language wasn't cautionary, it was mocking. The implication was clear. The original report wasn't just a mistake, it was outright laughable. And remember that 2 days after that, the British columnist added its voice, describing the crowd of 200 people gathering near the jail. The speed of this rebuttal was telling. Competing newspapers weren't just correcting the record, they were challenging the authority of the colonist, undermining its credibility in real time, and in doing so, they exposed something deeper: the way media could shape, distort, or dismantle a narrative before it even had time to settle. In 1884, sensationalism sold newspapers. A strange creature in the woods was irresistible, but so was the opportunity to tear that story down. The Jacko account became a battleground, not just for truth, but for influence. One outlet leaned into the mystery, another leaned into mockery, and somewhere in between, the public was left to decide what they believed and who they trusted. Though dismissed by newspapers within days of its publication, the Jacko account didn't vanish. It laid quietly for decades, waiting to be rediscovered, buried in microfilm and memory, until the 1850s brought a resurgence of interest in creatures that defied classification. This is when journalist Bruce McKillen rediscovered the 1884 article and passed it along to Sasquatch researcher John Green and Rene DeHidden. The article was the only surviving account of the alleged creature, as other newspapers from the region had reportedly been lost to fire. The timing was perfect. The search for Bigfoot was gaining momentum, and Jacko, small, hairy, fit the mold of a proto-Sasquatch, and Jacko was treated as a potential cornerstone in Canadian cryptid history. But John Green wasn't content to leave it there. Digging through microfilm archives at the University of British Columbia, Green uncovered 2 additional newspaper reports that cast the Jacko story in a very different light. This would be the Mainland Guardian article published on July 9th that ridiculed the original article, stating that no such animal was caught and calling it absurd, and the British Columbian article published on July 11th, describing the crowd of nearly 200 people gathered at the jail, discovering no creature, just a man overwhelmed with questions and visibly irritated. According to this, there was no Jacko, just spectacle. Green also interviewed elderly residents who had lived in the area at the time. Some remember the story being talked about, but none had seen the creature. No photographs existed, no physical evidence had ever surfaced, and the deeper he looked, the more the story unraveled, not with a bang, but with the quiet absence of anything verifiable. Years later, Green collaborated with Sabina Sanderson, the widow of cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson, to publish a piece titled "Alas, Poor Jacko" in the journal Pursuit in 1975. Together, they laid out evidence and concluded that the Jacko account was most likely a piece of journalistic fiction, crafted not to deceive maliciously, but to entertain, to stir curiosity, and to sell papers. It fit the pattern of the 19th century sensationalism where the line between reporting and storytelling was often blurred. Jacko, they argued, was never meant to be a cryptid. He was a character born of rumor, shared by ink, and sustained by the public's appetite for the strange. The 1884 article, stripped of credibility, still carried weight, not as fact but as folklore. In the decades that followed, Jacko was embraced by cryptid researchers as a kind of proto-Sasquatch, a juvenile figure that predated the wave of sightings that would later define the Bigfoot phenomenon. His small stature, long forearms, hair-covered body was treated as clues, not contradictions. In British Columbia, where Sasquatch lore runs deep, Jacko may have been the missing link to the region's cryptid lineage. He appeared in Ivan T. Sanderson's Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, where the story was framed as possible evidence of a subhuman creature surviving into the modern age. John Green included Jacko in Bigfoot, On the Track of Sasquatch, and again in Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, treating the account as part of a broader puzzle, even if the pieces didn't quite fit. The tale was repeated in Grover Cran's work, referenced in Lorene Coleman's writings, and echoed in documentaries like The Mysterious Monsters from 1976 and In Search of, both narrated by Leonard Nimoy. Jacko's story even found its way onto the A&E series Ancient Mysteries, where it was presented as an early Canadian Bigfoot case. More recently, it was featured in the podcast Dark Poutine in an episode titled Fact or Fiction, Jacko the Ape Boy from Yale, BC, which explored both the historical context and the lingering mysteries surrounding the tale. Even Michael Cremo, known for his controversial theories on human origins, cited Jacko as possible evidence of abnormal humanoids. Today, Jacko's name still surfaces in cryptid forums and online communities, tucked beneath sightings and speculations, often cited as one of the earliest recorded encounters with a creature that defied classification. The story is dissected, debated, and reimagined, not because it holds any proof, but because it holds potential. And in the world of cryptids, that's often enough. Jacko remains a fixture in Canadian cryptid history. Jacko may be gone, but his story runs beneath the tracks, woven into the rails that cut through Yale. Whether he was ever real or simply a reflection of what we wanted to believe remains unanswered. A creature caught in a moment and then lost to time. No photographs, no remains, just a few inches of newsprint and a century of speculation. His story fascinates because it speaks to something deeper, our need to find wonder in the wilderness, to imagine the unknown might still be walking among us. Jacko became a symbol of possibility, a flicker of mystery in a world that often demands certainty. But there's another layer, too. The way Jacko was described, displayed, and ultimately dismissed mirrors how society has long treated those who are different. Jojo the dog-faced boy paraded by Barham was a real person, intelligent, multilingual, and exploited for his appearance. Jacko, whether fictional or not, was framed as something less than human, something to be gawked at, feared, or sold, and in some cases, the spectacle overshadowed the soul. So maybe the question really isn't whether or not Jacko existed, but what his story reveals about us, how we chase the strange, how we shape it to fit our fears or fantasies, and how easily we forget that behind every legend, real or imagined, there might be a life, a voice, a truth we've never bothered to hear. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of it all. Thanks for joining me on this eerie journey through Canada's darker corners. If you love this episode of Canadian Creepies, be sure to follow Valerie on Instagram and TikTok at Canadian Creepies. She's the one behind the socials, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, creepy photos, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more haunted history and twisted folklore, be sure to check out my other podcast, Down the Crooked Path. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok for even more haunted history, mythical madness, and spine-tingling storytelling. Come say hi, share your own creepy encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay creepy.